How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to another Marvel Snap Zone video. We have the tier list for September 11th, and things have been shaken up by Loki. It is a crazy tier list. Some new decks coming into the meta, old decks coming back into the meta. Decks that I never thought would be tier 1 are now tier 1. It's insane. I'm going to go over the tier 1 and tier 2 decks. Everything else, if you want to see, especially like the silent performers, I recommend checking out the full article. The link will be in the description. Den does a fantastic job, better than I do, of breaking down each of these decks and why these decks are where they are in the meta. I'm just trying to bring you guys a video form of it where I talk about the top couple tiers and give you guys my thoughts on the current meta and maybe where it's headed. But for silent performers, we have Galactus making the list. I don't think it's been anywhere near the meta tier list for a while now, so doing pretty well now. Evolve, Lockjaw, and Sarah Control, all in silent performers. In order to get out of the silent performers list, you need like a certain percentage of popularity to get out of it, but as far as win rate and cube rate is concerned, they're doing fantastic. And so, quick rundown of the tiers. We have Shuri Sauron leading the list currently right now in tier 1, followed by Hela Tribunal. Don't know how that's there, but it is, and it's doing pretty well. I've actually had some trouble against it recently. So it's here in tier 1. Loki Collector, third best deck in the game. I think it's higher than that. I think it may be the best deck in the game. But as far as I think it's just a more difficult deck to play because of its flexibility and how flexible it is. And so it's hard to play correctly, which I think brings its win rate slightly down. I don't think it's this crazy broken everyone bow down to this deck, but it is very good, and it's crazy that it's come around just in the first week and it's made an impact. The Loki Collector deck is actually basically the good cards full hand deck that we've seen in the past. I think generally it ran Dino, it ran Collector, Agent, and all that stuff, but Loki has kind of taken it over the top. So we'll go over the deck list a little bit later. Evolve Doomwave with the changes to Doom. Doom is strong again. A lot of people are playing him. And then we get into tier 2, Cerebro 3 making the list, followed by Patriot Surfer, Infinite SheHulk, Move Legion, Sarah Surfer, and then Deadpool Destroy is tier 3. So a lot of these decks we have seen before. Most of the tier 2 decks we've seen before. I'm not going to go over them really much. I'm going to skim through them. But let's start off with talking once again about Shuri Sauron. So Shuri Sauron once again topping the list. I think it was number 1 last week as well. Again, saw the list. I don't think it's number 1. I think it floats around. So does Den. Floats around like the third best deck or so. I think Loki Collector is better. However, right now, Shuri deserves to be in tier 1 just because of how effective it is. A lot of the tech cards are being phased out because everyone is trying to counter the Loki Collector deck. And a lot of people are playing Loki Collector decks. And when you're playing a Loki Collector deck, you don't want to play cards like Shang-Chi, because when you're playing the mirror matchup, they have the answer to your Collector. So a lot of tech cards are phasing out or being changed to things like Shadow King or just other different tech cards that aren't Shang-Chi, Enchantress, those kinds of things, which means this allows this Shuri list to sit at the top pretty comfortably with not much fear. I've been running not the Shuri Sauron list, but a Shuri Kitty list. I think this is actually the exact list that I've been running. I've been seeing a lot of success with it. I haven't had much time to play this last week because I've been on vacation, so I'm still climbing. I'm not infinite yet. Hopefully I can hit that in the next few days. But this Shuri Kitty list is one of my favorites. Outside of that, not much to say. It's a Shuri Sauron list. It's solid. It's linear. You know what you're trying to do. It's easy to climb ladder with it because if you can do what you're trying to do, you're probably going to win. And if you can't, you can retreat. So overall, a good deck. I don't think it has a very high cube rate because it is pretty easy to retreat against. But it's doing pretty well in the meta, so give this deck a shot if you're trying to climb as fast as possible. Again, this is what I'm using to try to climb right now. Next up, we have Hela Tribunal. I have no clue how this is in tier 1, but it is. And I think, once again, some of the tech cards are phased out. Things like Enchantress which affects this deck a lot. Cards, Polaris, that was in the Move Legion deck, that's not as popular, so can't screw with your Invisible Woman too much. Spider-Man is not being seen too much, so this deck really just doesn't have a lot of weeds to sift through, and can just sit comfortably up here. It's always been a powerful deck. I'm not a fan of it. Doesn't fit my playstyle, but it is here and it's doing pretty well overall as far as cube rate and win rate is concerned. Depending on how Alioth has shook up the meta, if Galactus decks are back, this could find some problems, but you may have a few hours before that happens. So next up, we have Loki Collector, the big list for the week. Loki has changed the meta like no other card before. Maybe Zabu and Surfer have really come up with top meta decks right away when they released, but most of the recent cards have not impacted the meta like Loki has. This deck is insanely fun to play. I am so happy Snowguard is useful now. I get to use him for something, and it's not even to use him for him. It's to use him to have cards in my hand so Loki can give me more cards. But it doesn't matter. He's useful. Who's laughing now, Glazer? Now, the different decks that are being run, Den wanted to point out here, the different decks for Loki have drastically different win rates. So the one that you're seeing here has a 0.5 cube average and about a 60% win rate. The list that runs more of the agents, like Agent 13, Maria Hill, then that kind of a list, has a 53% win rate with a 0.15 cube average. So just running any Loki Collector deck is not the answer. The list definitely matters, and the list actually that you're seeing here is what I was running for a while there. It's been a lot of fun. I think that learning to snap properly with it and against it is a lot more difficult than people think. And so for me, as far as climbing, I really hit a stagnant point. But outside of that, it's a really good deck. I'm happy Loki's in the game. It makes for some wild plays. And it's just an interesting card. I thought he was going to be terrible when they announced him, because generally in most card games, getting random cards from your opponent's deck is pretty bad. However, in Marvel Snap, most of the cards your opponent are going to be running, because it's a 12 card deck, are going to be good, and they put power on board. And in Marvel Snap, what you're trying to do is get power on board. So if you can play cards for one cost less, which is huge in a game where the highest cost is 6, basically, discounting by 1 for a lot of these cards is massive. And if there's a lot of decks in the meta like this that are running low cost cards, and you fill your hand with them, and all your 2 cost cards now cost 1, that's a 50% mana reduction, and that's massive. So Loki's a lot better than I thought he was going to be. He impacted the meta. He's made the meta shift like no other card really has. Again, outside of Zabu and Surfer, maybe. But if you haven't tried him, if you don't have the season pass, if you're looking to buy season pass, if you're one of those people who's been mostly free to play, this is the pass to buy. Buy Loki, try him out. He's unbelievably fun. Some wild stuff happens in these games. Next up is Evolve Doomwave. We've seen this list before. I'm not going to go over it too much, but I do want to stress in this section, last week I talked about how the silent performers have been working their way into these tier lists. A lot of the times these silent performer decks are very good decks. They haven't made it out into the public yet. They haven't been made big by some of these YouTubers who post these decks that once they say something about a deck, everyone is playing it. And so they're good decks that perform very well, and a lot of times get into this slot. Last week, Doomwave was a silent performer. Now it's in tier 1. So once again, I just want to stress, check out the silent performers in this list, especially maybe the Galactus list that we have here. The addition of Alioth into the Galactus list, I think, is just going to be nuts. But it's Doomwave. There's not a whole lot to go over here. It's just overall a solid deck with the recent buff to Dr. Doom. Just got even better. So it's back. Try it if you missed the last wave of Doomwave. It's fantastic. It's solid. It's easy to play and it's easy to climb with. Next up is Cerebro 3. I am not a fan of Cerebro decks. I think they get messed up by a lot of locations and it's frustrating. So I'm not the biggest fan. However, against these Loki decks that you're seeing everywhere, because Loki is very popular right now, Cerebro is a fantastic list to run, and that's why this deck is here. It's very effective against the Loki list with cards like Shadow King and Valkyrie to bring their collector back down to earth. This deck is just very good specifically against that deck. Right now, I think the amount of players playing Loki decks has dropped off from the beginning of the week, and I don't know how successful this deck is going to be, especially with Alioth coming out. I don't know when this video is coming out. It might be Tuesday morning. If it is Tuesday morning, Alioth is already out, and there's probably not going to be enough Loki decks to justify running this. However, if you want to give this a shot, this is probably your best chance, because I think Loki decks are just going to start coming down in popularity. So Cerebro 3 made the list. Fantastic. Next up is Patriot Surfer, has been knocked down to tier 2. I believe it was tier 1 last week. Absorbing Man getting nerfed kind of hits this deck pretty hard. Instead of being able to put out 15 power with Absorbing Man on turn 4, you will now only get 12. And other lists just go taller and put out more power more consistently than this list currently. But again, it's still tier 2. It's a solid list. We've seen it before. Most of the decks coming up we've seen before, so I'm going to skim over them unbelievably quickly. Patriot Surfer, tier 2 now, still good. I don't know how well it performs in Conquest. I haven't really given it a shot. I haven't had a chance to play a lot of Conquest recently. But yeah, give the deck a shot. I mean, playing Forge into Brood on turn 3 and then Absorbing Man on turn 4 is still a lot of power. So this deck isn't bad by any means. It just isn't as good as, say, the Shuri list or the Silver Surfer or the Hela Tribunal list at putting out power. So give it a shot. I'm sure you already have if you've been watching these videos. Next up, Infinite SheHulk. Same list as before. It's a solid deck. It's good at what it tries to do. Again, I just don't think it's as good as the Shuri list as getting power out right now, because of the lack of counter cards, specifically Shang-Chi. The Shuri list is just much more effective. So again, this is the same list that we've been seeing. The list with Leech, not Moon Girl. Tier 2. I'm trying to skim through these because there's not much to say about these ones. Next up is Move Legion. This list is slightly different. It's running Wave and Doctor Doom with the buff to Doctor Doom. Apparently, it just works a bit better. Snow Guard is being run in this list instead of Kitty Pryde. I am not 100% convinced that that's better than Kitty, but the stats show that I'm wrong and that Snow Guard is here. Again, I'm not mad at Snow Guard being anywhere in the meta. So I haven't tried this specific list out, but I mean, give it a try. It does have some reactive cards with Shang-Chi. You can try to swap that out for maybe Enchantress or something, and that's kind of your tech card slot. But again, it's Move Legion. There's not a whole lot to say here. It's still a solid deck. It's just not quite as good as the others right now in the current meta. And the last deck we're talking about is Sarah Surfer. Just another Surfer list. I think if you're going to run Surfer, the Patriot Surfer list is just better. Shadow King, pretty effective against the collector decks at the moment. The nerf to Absorbing Man, again, brings this deck down. This deck's really been all over the place in the recent weeks on the tier list. It's still solid. It's a good Surfer list. It's, again, just not as good as the other tier one decks. It has a clear game plan. It executes it very well. But even when it does, it just doesn't go as big as the other decks in the current meta. Other versions of this list ran Nova and Killmonger, but the effectiveness of Killmonger has dropped off significantly in the last weeks. So running Killmonger to just fire off your Nova really isn't worth it. So this list, I think, is probably one of the better lists out at the moment. It does have that Storm Juggernaut combo, but most Surfer lists you can swap out any of the 3-drops for any other 3-drops. There are a few that you really can't, like Brood, obviously Silver Surfer. In this current meta, I would keep Shadow King in there. Polaris has a bunch of power, but you can still swap that out if you'd like. And with Absorbing Man Brood combo, I would keep Absorbing Man in there as well. And all that being said, with Wave coming back into the meta, with Doom Wave being up there in tier 1, and Wave being thrown into some other decks, these decks like Surfer where you're looking to dump a bunch of cards on turn 6 are not going to be as effective, and they just get turned off by one card. So that could be an explanation of why this has dropped so much further. But just be wary of Wave. Again, it's still a solid deck, but that's it. That's all the tier 1 and tier 2 decks. Again, please check out these silent performers. They frequently get shot up into these tier 2, tier 1s in the following weeks. If you're interested, check out the tier 3 decks on here. There's also budget lists that Den includes for those of you who don't have as much of a complete collection. Interesting week this week with Loki. Really shook things up. I've had a lot of fun with Loki. It really had a lot of like highlight plays where you're playing Loki, copying your opponent's Loki, you're playing it again, you're copying a Loki and a collector, so you're playing a second collector, and just offers for some wild plays. So I've had a lot of fun. However, towards the end of the week, it has really gotten a little bit old. So I'm excited to see other decks coming back, the meta shifting, and I like when the meta shifts. I like when there's changes and things don't get stale. I will say with Marvel Snap, at least recently, I feel like the meta has not gotten unbelievably stale like it has in the past. And there's always curveballs getting thrown in and things getting changed and OTAs switching things up now. So I'm really happy of where the game is right now. I hope you guys are. I do one of these tier list breakdowns. I do 2 of them, one for ladder, one for conquest, every week on the Marvel Snap Zone channel. But I have my own YouTube channel. The link will be in the description. Go check that out if you're interested in seeing the other stuff that I do. I do mainly bundle breakdowns and some deck videos and things. I do deck videos for some of these lists, actually. I think I'm going to have one for the Shuri Kitty list coming up soon. So, as usual, if you love all things Marvel Snap, make sure you like and subscribe, hit the bell. I'll see you in the next one.